I think we are live. Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to this very special webcast today. We're very excited to have Marissa Meyer here. It's right smack dab in the middle of NaNoWriMo right now. It's 15th, halfway through the month. So if y'all don't know me, I'm Catherine. I'm the communications manager here at NaNoWriMo. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. And I'm here today with China. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm China. I am the donation weekend manager at NaNoWriMo, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. And of course, our special guest today, Marissa Meyer. If you want to introduce yourself.
I would love to. Hi, I'm Marissa. I just like doing nano and have done it for many of my novels. And my pronouns are she, her. And I'm just so pleased that you guys invited me today.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you. And hi to everyone who's joining and in the chat. If you want to drop in where you're coming in from today, where you're watching from, or how your NaNoWriMo project is going, feel free to let us know about that. If you haven't already made your project on the NaNoWriMo website, you should definitely do that and update your word count. Yeah, and we've got tons of virtual events happening this month, of which this is one of them. So I'll put a link to the calendar in the chat as well. So if people want to look at all the events we've got going on, you can check that out. And of course, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notifications for more videos happening. But yeah, so today we're gonna talk to Marissa about her new book, which I have just read and I'm very excited about. We both just read.
Thank you.
China and I, when we were planning this webcast, we were talking. We were just like, oh my! I had finished it and she hadn't quite finished it yet, and I was like, how are we going to talk about this without giving away any spoilers?
Yeah, there were so many. Like all the questions I had were just like, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. So.
Well, I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can and try not to spoil things.
Great.
And I'm working on book 2 today.
Ooh.
So there too is like, don't say anything about book 2.
So exciting. Yay. But yeah, so we'll ask you some questions about GILDED, your new book, and then we'll do a little writing sprint in the middle, since it is NaNoWriMo, so that we can actually get some words down. And then if folks have questions that you want to ask Marissa, please put them in the chat, and we'll be collecting those to ask at the end of the webcast. So yeah, yay.
So Marissa, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with NaNoWriMo? How long have you been doing it? Also, important question, are you a planner or a pantser?
Okay, I am a planner big time. I think one nano I attempted to pants it and it was an utter disaster. And I was like stressed and miserable the entire month. So I learned my lesson. That is not for me. So I typically always go into, whether I'm doing nano or just starting on any new writing project, I always start with an outline, usually a fairly bare bones outline. I don't plan it in depth, but I like to know what are my major plot points that I need to hit, and some general idea of how I'm going to get from here to here to here. And then I go from there. And my experience, I think the first nano that I ever did was 2006. And I haven't done it every year, but I try to do it as many years as I can. I don't know, this is maybe my 10th or 11th time doing it.
That's awesome. I forget, China. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I forget if you're a planner or a pantser.
I am a pantser. Like I do kind of like, I can like headlights. I just need to know where I'm going, and then how I get there, just the story does what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more I do it, the more I realize that I'm a pantser. Try to write outlines and I always go off script. So
yeah. And I know a lot of writers like will try doing the outline, but then they feel like it just sucks the joy out of the discovery process for them. So, I think there's no wrong way. Like I think it's good to experiment with different things, but if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tried pantsing one year. It kind of like you, Marissa, it was horrible. Like it was, I did not win that year.
Yeah, I think when I did it, I like barely crossed the finish line, but yeah, just high anxiety the entire time. Like, how can I sit down to write today? I have no idea what's supposed to happen. Ugh.
Oh man. So so your latest novel is Gilded, and I'm so excited that you're working on the second one right now. But yeah, so I really love this. It's I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that it's kind of a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin.
Mm-hmm.
So I love fairy tale retellings. I read a lot of them myself. So I was just I was curious because you also write a lot of sort of like fairy tale retellings.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just sort of wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit kind of what inspires you about fairy tales and what made you decide to choose Rumpelstiltskin for this one, and kind of how you decide what to keep and what to change from the original story.
Yeah. So I love fairy tale retellings as a reader. And I've just been interested in fairy tales since I was a little kid. I had the books of Grimm Brothers tales when I was growing up. And then once I realized that like the stories were so different from like what stories Disney was telling me, I just got really curious to know, okay, well, what else is out there? And so I've just kind of been interested in fairy tales my whole life. And I love that, they are these super universal stories. You find these archetypal stories and themes across so many time periods, so many cultures. Like clearly there is something in these stories that speaks to us on just like a deeply human level. But I also love that even though they are so universal and so widespread, if you give any story, if you tell 100 writers to write a retelling of Cinderella, you're going to get 100 totally different books. And I just think it's so cool that you can take these stories and, keep the heart of them, or keep these very iconic elements of them, and yet be able to take that and go in so many different directions and add your own voice to it and your own interpretation. And I just think that's really cool as a creative type. There's just so many, different places you can take it.
Yeah.
And then what else did you ask me? Oh, Rumpelstiltskin in particular.
Yeah.
So this was one story that I loved as a kid, but also found like ridiculously frustrating. So for people who may not have heard the story of Rumpelstiltskin in a while, it's the one where the miller's daughter is asked to spin straw into gold by the king. He threatens to kill her if she can't do it. This little guy, this like impish elfin dude shows up, spins the straw for her, and eventually she bargains away her firstborn child. And then 9 months later, she has to like guess the guy's name or else he's going to take her baby. And it's like a weird story, which is part of the reason that I love it so much. But I just felt like there were so many plot holes. Like after the third time that she spins the straw into gold, the king is like, okay, I'm going to marry you now. Clearly only because she has this magical gift. And yet it never comes up again. And I was like always waiting for that moment when the king figures it out, like she can't actually do this thing. Evidently not. Evidently he's satisfied. And that just didn't sit well with me. I couldn't get behind the idea that now, okay, she gets to keep the baby and she's the queen and it all works out, even though she's married to this guy that like arbitrarily threatened to kill her multiple times. And anyway, yeah, there was a lot of things that bugged me about it. So that's why I wanted to retell the story and kind of get to put my own spin and answer some of these questions and fill some of these plot holes. And yeah, try to redo it in a way that I would find more satisfying.
And I really appreciate that you did this because I love this book.
Thank you. So suddenly there's this shiny bright thing in the sky. I'm gonna hop up and close my blinds because I'm like getting blinded all of a sudden. 1 second.
Yeah. Yeah, I never quite thought of the like kind of the plot hole of the king just not thinking about spinning straw into gold again, like that doesn't come up again, but it makes so much sense.
I guess I kind of filled the plot hole for myself. I thought, oh, maybe by now he actually loves her, so he doesn't care anymore. But that's never actually in the story. I just kind of put it in there.
I like that though. You go to the romantics angle. You're like, clearly they're meant to be. It's a fairy tale.
Which is completely weird because I like, kind of like you, I love Grimm's fairy tales. So I'm more of the horrible, horrific ending kind of person. I like those tales.
Yes, right?
So that kind of brings us to our next question. Like, how do you approach writing about themes or creating scenes that go into dark or heavy issues? Because you don't tell things in the way Disney tells them. So how do you stay away from those Disney-like happily ever after stories?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of my books do have a happily ever after, and I love a happily ever after. But I like things that lean into some darkness. I think that there is darkness in this world. And I think that one of the ways that we can appreciate joy and beauty and love is because there is darkness, because we have something to contrast it with. And I think that works in fiction too. Like if you only write about the good stuff, the happy stuff, like who wants to read that story? So I don't shy away from going into the dark areas. Just as a storyteller, I think that's where a lot of interest lies. And I think that's where a lot of truth lies.
That's great.
I have so many questions, but they're all spoilers. Oh my gosh.
Man. Yeah, I know. It's really trying to find the right balance, but yeah, but one of the things that we were talking about when China and I were talking about this book is, and your books in general, it's like you have very strong voices, and I think like the character in this one, she tells stories herself, and so she has a very just like a very strong voice, and like a character who's very present on the page, and so we're hoping that you could talk a little bit about like kind of where you find inspiration for your characters and how you make their voices so present and resonant on the page.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to hear that you feel that way. Character development is a weird thing. For me, I would say it's a slow process. There was a time early on in my writing career when I tried to be that writer that would like, before I started writing the book, I would have these really detailed character sheets and I knew everything about these characters, but I found that it did not matter how much I planned and how much I knew about their backstory and their strengths and their quirks and, all of these things, it would inevitably change. Once I started writing, like I would start with this character in mind, but on the page, they would transform into somebody different. So I've given up on that, on trying to like know everything before I start. And instead I treat my first draft as my discovery draft when I am just getting to know the characters. Here they are in this story. I generally have a pretty good idea of what the plot is going to be. And so what story are they going through? But things like their voice and what matters to them, what they love, what they're afraid of, their motivations. These are things that will crop up more organically as I'm writing. And so a lot of times it's not until the second draft, sometimes even the third draft, that I really start to feel like, okay, I now know this character and their voice is in my head. I can start to hear them. How do they speak? What do they sound like? What are the things that they notice about the world about them, around them? And so once I hit that point, and now they've really started to come to life for me, then I have to go back to the beginning and pretty much rewrite all of the dialogue. And if, just a lot of narration, and a lot of things end up getting rewritten, not necessarily to a point that changes the story, but to a point where now it used to be in my voice, now it's in this person's voice. And so it's a process. It takes time, but I know now that if I just stick with it and keep going, eventually I will get to that point.
That's great. We actually, there's a question in the chat about how many drafts you do for every novel.
Yeah, it depends. It changes. Minimum 2. And that would be really, really lucky. I think I've had one book that came out almost fully formed, and it was like, wow, that was really cool. Doesn't usually happen. On average, probably 4-ish. And then probably the one that took the longest would have been Renegades. And I think by the time that book was done, I was like maybe 9 drafts or so. So it really depends on how much work this story needs. I know with Renegades in particular, just the concept and the heart of the story changed repeatedly. So I kind of kept having to scrap my old drafts and start over again. But once I finally figured it out, then it's like, okay, I finally figured it out. But it definitely took a while.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, especially newer writers, don't realize that it's perfectly fine to have multiple drafts. That's something that NaNoWriMo is about. You don't have to get it right the first draft. That's why it's called a rough draft. You just have to write it and, go from there.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I am a believer in the fast first draft. For me, I can't possibly hold the entire story in my brain all at once. So I need to kind of work through it in chunks. The first rough draft is exploratory. It's figuring out what is the story about, what are some of the major moments. The second draft maybe is more focused on characters. The third draft, maybe now we're really starting to understand the world and the history and the backstory. So it's like every draft gets a little bit more complex and a little bit more authentic as it's all starting to come together. But I could never write that all the first time and get it right. My brain just couldn't handle that.
Yeah. So, Catherine, did you have something to add?
Oh, no. I'm processing all the great advice and information.
Yeah, a lot of people in the chat are saying, oh, I didn't know that you could write as many, I thought there was a certain number of drafts you had to write. So.
And every book is different. Every writer is different, and every book is different. You'll find that different books challenge you in different ways.
Very true. And just going back a little bit to what Catherine said earlier about how your protagonist in GILDED, she tells stories. She's a storyteller. And so those tales within a tale kind of weave itself through the narrative. And I was just wondering, how do you approach that? How do you approach that story within a story structure? And what advice would you have for people who are trying to do or wanting to do something similar?
Yeah, so for me, there is this kind of fairy tale that Cyrilda is telling, and it's broken up into chunks throughout the story. So the reader only gets a little bit at a time. But I pretty much wrote that story in its entirety so that I knew that it worked as a complete story. And then went through and I knew which chapters Cyrilda was going to be telling the story. So I knew we pretty much had 4 different places in the book where I would be inserting this fairy tale. And then it was just a question of figuring out, okay, what do I want revealed by this point in the book? Because the more the characters know, then it changes things. Like it's almost like a mystery that Cyrilda's kind of putting together the clues of over the course of the story. So I didn't want to give away too much too soon. So it was just, figuring out where each section of the fairy tale would naturally break, inserting it into the narrative, and then making sure that, whatever the reaction or the fallout made sense for what she had just learned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh man, I'm kind of keeping track of the questions that are coming up in the chat, and there's a lot of good ones, so I'm excited to ask those. But before we move on to questions from our audience members, I'd love to take a little break and do some actual writing. Also, for people were asking about your podcast, the Happy Writer podcast. So,
oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I don't know if you want to talk about that very briefly.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, so I have a weekly podcast, and it goes up every Monday morning. It's called The Happy Writer, and it's just me chatting with other authors. And so we talk about the craft. We talk about kind of how we stay connected to writing, how we try to keep it a fun and joyous process, which isn't always easy, especially the last couple of years, but we do make an effort. We talk a little bit about publishing and our careers. And yeah, this time of year, NaNoWriMo comes up because so many published authors have used Nano as a springboard, or like me, we continue to use it to draft our books. So yeah, it's really fun. I don't know his title, your creative director, Grant Faulkner. He was on he was on the podcast last year, and his episode was so great, just like full of useful Nano tips. So for people doing Nano, I would totally recommend that they start there. But yeah, it's been just a lot of fun staying connected with other writers.
Awesome. Yeah, and we've got links to the podcast and to GILDED, where you can buy this book, and Marissa's website. All of that is in the video description. So if you want to learn more about this stuff, you can click on any of those links. All right, should we do some writing?
Let's do it. I'm so excited. I'm ready.
Awesome. So Marissa, I don't know if you have like a writing prompt that you'd like to share with us for.
I do. I gave it a little bit of thought this morning. And so we're halfway through the month, of course, here on the 15th of November, which means that a lot of us are probably looking at the midpoint of our novel or thereabouts. And so I'm giving a prompt for the midpoint, if you're there in your story yet. When you look at like typical plot structure, a lot of times the midpoint represents a reversal. So if in your story, your protagonist has, been making really great progress toward their goals up to this point, then the midpoint is a great time to throw something in their path or give them like a huge setback. Alternatively, if your protagonist has just been like struggling every step of the way up until now, then the midpoint is a good time to throw in a temporary victory for them. So the prompt for today is to give some thought to which type of reversal you think makes the most sense for your novel, and to either start writing that scene, that big moment, or maybe do some just like free thinking, brainstorming time to try to get an idea of what a great midpoint would be for you.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. So I think we'll write for 10 minutes for this prompt. And I'll put the prompt in the chat in the video description as well. But yeah, so thinking about our midpoints of our novels and a big reversal for your main character. So I've got 10 minutes on my timer here, so let's go ahead and start writing now.
Good luck, everyone.
3 minutes left in this one. All right, time is up for that.
Ooh.
How about another 5 minutes?
Things are just getting good.
If folks want to let us know how that went, or share a sentence that they wrote, or the word count that they got, feel free to drop that in the chat.
How did you do, Catherine?
Not a lot. Yeah, it's been a slow hard writing month for me, but that's okay. Some days are like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How
Sometimes
about
you need a little bit more space.
Yeah.
How about you, China?
So I managed to get 331 words, which is more than I got this entire weekend. So I'm glad I'm able to catch up.
Nice, done. Awesome.
What about you, Marissa?
I did 629, which is great for me for 10 minutes, but I knew exactly where I was going with this scene, so it helps to be prepared.
Yeah, I don't think even if I was extremely prepared, I could type that fast.
It does help. So it helps to have the finger dexterity.
I'm like an old person, like.
Oh man, we've got some good word counts in the chat. Jordan got 275. Katie Arone says 380 here, and the prompt was needed.
Oh, good.
Haley said, loved this prompt as a thriller writer.
Nice.
So a lot of people getting really great word counts. It sounded like a lot of people needed the prompt in the middle of the month.
I hope it was helpful.
Yeah.
I know I got through my midpoint scene over the weekend. So it was right at the top of my thoughts. And I will admit that now, like, I'm supposed to be working on the fallout of the midpoint, and that sounded kind of boring. So I just jumped straight ahead to the climax today.
Do you often jump around to scenes?
I do. I try to just go where the inspiration takes me. I mean, I write more or less in order, but there's days, and especially doing a writing sprint like this, where like I really want to get some words done. So I just try to figure out what am I most inspired to work on right now.
That's great.
Yeah, I know that's definitely helpful. Especially like, why are you writing something, you know, if you don't feel like writing it, go ahead and write what you want to write and then come back later.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you know, maybe you don't have it in you to write a swoony romance scene today, or maybe you just don't have the mental capacity to do like a big battle scene or whatever. That doesn't mean that you won't ever feel like writing that scene. Like there's going to be a day in the future when suddenly that sounds really fun. But yeah, I try not to force myself to do a scene that just sounds like a ton of work. If there's another scene that's like calling to me and like, write me, I'm going to be really fun. So yeah.
Well, I have some really good questions coming up in the chat, so I want to make sure that we have some time to answer them. So China, if you see any that you like, feel free to.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to point out that, yeah, writing prompts are definitely helpful. So a lot of people are just thanking you for the prompt.
My pleasure. I'm so glad.
We have a question. Someone asked, and I don't want to, you know, assume your pronouns, but someone asked, do you use a 3-act structure in your novels?
Yes, I do. I'm not usually thinking of, well, I guess I sort of am thinking of it in 3-act structure. I think of it in terms of the inciting incident that kind of divides Act 1 from Act 2. And then that moment between 2 and 3 when you start building up toward the climax. And I don't, you know, some people call it like doorway to 3, or I mean, there's different terminology for it. So yeah, so I am thinking about those big moments. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's a yes.
Had somebody else ask advice on how to end chapters.
Cliffhangers, always. Keep them wanting more. Don't let them go to bed at night.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I
mean, yes, but no.
Yeah, you definitely did that. I could not. 300 pages in a day had to be read, or else I was not satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, I think the end of every chapter, just try to leave people wanting more. It could be that something gets revealed at the end of a chapter. It could be a question that gets asked. Yeah, every chapter is, of course, going to, you know, call for something different depending on what's happening in the story. But if a chapter feels like too resolved, then it's like, okay, time to shut it down and go to move something else. Like I try to avoid that.
I think you do a good job with that.
Thank you.
Rule number 1 asked, how do you organize your writing? What kind of planner do you use? So do you use like big posters, or, you know, note cards? How do you plan your writing?
So I have my, here you can see, I have my big whiteboard, which doesn't have it right now, but when I'm starting a project, I will usually do index cards And so I'll write down all of the ideas for scenes that I have and then put them up on the whiteboard and start shuffling things around and, figure out what's going to fill those big plot moments. What's the midpoint? What's the climax? What's the inciting incident? And then from there, like I might realize, oh, I've got my inciting incident and my midpoint right next to each other. Hold on, something's got to go in between here. And so then I start kind of figuring out what's going to fill that space. Once I am done with the note cards and I feel like, okay, feels like a complete story, then I transfer those notes into Scrivener, and pretty much organized everything in Scrivener from there on out.
Yeah, I started using Scrivener this year because I used to, I still do most of my writing by hand, but I wanted to try Scrivener for my NaNo project. It was a really weird learning curve,
Yes.
But I find it really helpful that you can move things around so easily.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah, no, that's probably the biggest thing for me is just being able to, oh, this chapter now needs to go up here, click, drag, done. Whereas like I wrote my first novel, CINDER, all on Microsoft Word, and was like, gosh, if you want to move a chapter, okay, find the chapter, drag, cut, paste, and how many, I remember like losing chapters, like hold on, or misplacing them, like, oh, so frustrating. So Scrivener makes that part really easy, but it is absolutely a learning curve. It is a big, complex program, and there's so many different features. For people who are maybe new to Scrivener, I suggest keep it simple, like just figure out the basics and start writing your novel and worry about all the bells and whistles later.
Yeah. We have NaNoWriMo participants get a discount on Scrivener, and a bunch of other writing softwares. So I think there are some other ones that are maybe not quite as complicated as Scrivener. If that's something that you want to check out, you can go onto the NaNoWriMo website. We have a sponsor offers page that has like a bunch of deals on different writing softwares and stuff like that. And if you meet your NaNoWriMo goal, some of them have extra special deals, so you can use that as more incentive to keep writing.
Nice.
We're bribing you with writing stuff.
Yeah, right. Basically, using all the tricks in the book. Sarah Lynn asked if you could talk about your revision process a little. Like, do you rewrite it in a new document? Do you edit directly in draft one? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, so I, like I said, I write in Scrivener. So that means that every chapter is in a different file within Scrivener. So when it's time to revise, I will start with a big epic list of everything I don't like about the book, and everything that needs to be fixed and changed. And from there, I'll go and in the notes section of every chapter, like, for example, let's say I don't need this character anymore. They're not serving the plot. I'm going to delete a character. So then I would go and find that character in every chapter that they're in. And in the notes section, write delete so-and-so, delete so-and-so, delete so-and-so. And okay, now I know that my romance isn't working. So I'd go and see every chapter where the main couple is together and have a note, do something about the romance, make the romance better, blah, blah, blah. So by the end of that process, now I've got every chapter within Scrivener has these notes, and I know exactly what needs to happen within that specific chapter. And then I just start digging into it and trying to make it better from there.
Nice.
Yeah. A lot of people are asking about your, like, what do you do with your projects if you decide not to publish them? Do you have like a drawer per se of unfinished or tossed projects?
Yeah, no, I have not a drawer, but I have a file on my computer, old stories, I think it's labeled, and so many things on there. And even to this day, I mean, it's not unheard of for me to start a novel thinking this is going to be my next novel, and then get into the process and realize it's not working for whatever reason, and end up setting it aside and moving on to something new. So that still happens.
So you hear that, Rymos? You do not have to finish every project.
You don't. No, it's true. You do eventually, if you want to be a published author, you do eventually have to finish something. Like, it is important to learn to finish your work. But there are a million different reasons why one project or another might just not be the right one for you to be working on at any given moment. And it's okay to listen to those instincts.
D. Caller asked, how long does it take to complete a book, like from outline to final draft?
It varies. On average, 6 months to a year, depending. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, that's so quick.
That's what I was thinking, like 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, some of my books are really big, and some of them are not so big. So it really varies. Yeah.
Katie in her bookish wonderland, love the handle, by the way, says, what is your least favorite part of writing and how do you get past it?
My least favorite part of writing. So in the first draft, there is always this moment, and it's always between like 25,000 and 30,000 words. For me, my books usually end up around 100,000 plus. So right around that like 1/3 point, when you just start to hate the book and you're just like, this book is terrible and I don't know why I thought I could write this book. I don't know why I picked this idea of all my other million ideas. What was I thinking? It's never going to come together. It's never going to work. Just on and on and on. And all of these doubts start to creep in. And of course, I hate that point because nobody likes feeling that way. I will say that now, this far into my career, I've learned to expect it. I know that it's coming. When it hits, it's not a surprise anymore. And so I know that I just need to keep writing. And that's usually the time when I really hunker down on, stay focused on the outline. Don't worry about making it perfect or good or even halfway decent. Just go through the steps, get the words down, keep moving forward. And inevitably, I will reach a point when it starts to work again. And suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I was wrong. This book is going to be awesome. But you have to kind of push through those doubts and those scary points to get there. So, yeah.
That's so reassuring to hear. I think I've just hit that point with my novel that I'm currently like working on revisions on. So
yeah, it's super normal. It is super normal. I don't know any writers who don't go through that. So try not to be discouraged. Just keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's I'm kind of where Catherine. I'm not like at the midpoint. I'm still kind of figuring things out because I did not plan as much as I normally do this November. But I was thinking to myself over the weekend, like, this is not where I want it to be. And I don't know if I should keep working on this or like toss it aside and start something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question to answer too. And I don't know that there's necessarily a right or a wrong, because like we mentioned before, sometimes books just don't work and it is okay to move on to something different. Before you make that decision, one thing that has helped me is to, take a few hours or maybe even an entire day or two and kind of try to go back to the beginning and go back to that moment when you first had this idea and try to remember, why did I start writing this book in particular? What was it that I got really excited about? What was inspiring me at the time? And just see if you can kind of reconnect to that. And a lot of times that will, kind of make you realize like, oh, I really wanted, I was really excited about this like great villain that was speaking to me. And here I am, 30,000 words, and we haven't even met the villain yet. And so it can like kind of point you in the right direction to maybe say, I do want to write this book. I've just kind of gotten off track a little bit. and just try to like, re-spark that original love that you had for it.
Great. I had Penny asked if you had if you have a soundtrack that you listen to while you're writing.
I do have a soundtrack. I always make playlists for all of my books. So you can find the Gilded playlist on Spotify. It's like super eerie and melancholy and moody. I don't usually listen to music while I'm writing, but I will listen to it like in the car, or I'll like take a nice bath and listen to it and just kind of try to stay in that headspace.
That's awesome. Definitely gonna go look up that playlist.
Definitely gonna do that right after this, actually. There was another question about future projects. Like, so do you have like a collection of all your the stories you might want to work on in the future? Like, oh, I got this idea, I'll work on it later kind of thing?
I do. I have a file that I keep on OneNote. So it's always accessible on my phone or on my computer, depending on where I am. And yeah, whenever I get a new idea, I just write it down there so I know that I'm not going to forget it. But I found the ideas that stick around, that won't go away, that just kind of keep knocking at the door and pestering at you. Those are almost always the ones that I will turn to when it comes to doing my next project. But for me, like, I am one of those writers where I have so many ideas. I have so many books that I want to write. And so the question is never like, will I write or do I have any ideas? The question is always, okay, which one? Because there's, even at this moment, I'd say there's probably a half dozen stories that I am just like dying to get to. So yeah, it's hard. It's so hard.
But exciting though.
It is exciting. Of course, this is what I love to do. And I guess there's always a bit of a relief to know that there are more ideas waiting, and that I do still get so excited for them.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Oh, Courtney Thompson had a great question about how do you keep settings from being repetitive? And they say, my main character is in a band, and so far important things will happen on stage or with the group. Mm-hmm. So there's like one place where all of the important things are happening in your novel. Like, how do you keep that fresh and interesting?
Yeah, no, it is a challenge. I know for me, I've written like one contemporary, and it's like, okay, you live in your house, and like sometimes you're at your friend's house, and sometimes you're at school. Like, it's hard to kind of make the settings exciting again. I would take a look at your story and ask yourself, can any of these important scenes, do they have to take place on stage? Can I move one to I don't know, a bar? Can this one happen in a penthouse apartment of like some VIP fan? Like, I don't know. But like, see, is it necessarily have to happen at this setting over and over again? Can you kind of, take some of them and move them around? If the answer is yes, then spend some time brainstorming. Okay, what would be some other cool scenes? Where are some other places bands hang out? We got hotel rooms, we got bars, we got music stores. Like, just spend some time asking, what are some other settings that might work for this story? And then the ones where like, no, that really has to happen on stage, and I've got, 6 scenes that all have to happen here. I would say to focus on different details for every scene. Who's in the audience during this one? What's happening with the lighting during this one? Can something go wrong in this scene that doesn't go, maybe there's a problem with the sound system that's causing some drama. Doesn't have to happen in every one. So just trying to find a different elements of that setting that you can kind of bring to the surface that can be different in every one.
I love that. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've ever seen Noises Off. It's like a movie Broadway show, but it's like about a theater production. And the first act, you see it from the, like in a rehearsal where everything goes wrong. And the second act is from backstage. So like finding different perspectives. I love that.
Yay, theater references. Oh, I kind of wish that we had more time.
Me too. I just want to sit here and pick your brain about writing, like all
About everything.
Well, this has been fun. I always love talking writing. And I hope it's been helpful. And I hope that people might check out the podcast, because this is pretty much what we do in every episode.
That's great. Yeah. Do you have any like last pieces of advice or anything that you want to share with?
Don't overthink it. You know, Nano, the whole point is just getting that messy, rough draft done so that you have something to come back to and work with later. Don't try to be perfect. Don't worry if it's not good. Like, just get the words down, and know that you can come back. There will be time to revise. There will be time to edit, but now is not that time.
Awesome. Thank you. Yay. Thank you so much. This is great. Just a reminder to folks, if you want to check out Marissa's new book, Gilded, it's very good. Highly recommend. That link is in the video description, as is the link to the podcast if you want to check out her podcast. And like I said, we'll be doing lots of events for the rest of this month. So you can check out our calendar for that. And yeah, make sure to keep writing and updating your word counts. And yeah, you got this.
Yeah, one last thing though, for what our YWP participants, do your homework before you start reading, because you will not be able to put it down.
That's good advice.
Just so you know.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Yeah, it was so much fun to have you. And thanks everybody for joining, and good luck with your writing. Bye everyone.